This is Rights at Risk, a podcast from the World Organization Against Torture. We explore human rights through stories from the front lines and analysis from experts.
No human being is illegal.
I'm your host, Claire-Marie Germain. Since the terrorist attack on October 7, the number of Palestinian detainees in Israeli jail has exploded, and with it cases of torture.
Within the last half hour, the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza has announced that more than 30,000 Palestinians have been killed in the territory since the conflict began on October the 7th.
Tal Steiner is the executive director of the Public Committee Against Torture in Israel, also called PCATI. Her organization investigates claims of torture and files complaints on behalf of Palestinian prisoners. She tells us what she has seen in Israeli jails and what we can all do to help. Hello Tal, and welcome to Rights at Risk. Have you noticed an increase in the cases of torture since the 7th of October?
Well, absolutely. If until then we would document about a dozen complaints of torture each year in regards to interrogation, but very few cases with regards to the situation in the prison, by prison guards, by the prison service, that has changed drastically since the war. It started with a very massive wave of detention and arrest throughout the West Bank and Gaza, so much more people are now imprisoned. Almost 10,000 Palestinians are in Israeli incarceration right now. That's double the amount of regular years. That has also affected the overcrowding in the prison, and according to the recent data, more than 90% of Palestinian prisoners are made to sleep on the floor in Israeli prisons since the start of the war because of this overcrowding. It also means that there are shortages of food, of electricity, of medical care. All of that has been documented since the onset of the war, and it has not been precedented. This is a new situation. And then the other issue that we started seeing is also many cases of abuse and of direct violence, random and arbitrary, of sexual humiliation and degradation, other forms of harassment that we've seen towards Palestinian detainees by prison guards. And that's a phenomenon that we haven't seen before, not in this scale. We understand this to be a system, to be a policy directed from above. We've been witnessing very extreme statements by the Israeli Minister of National Security, the far-right politician Itamar Ben-Gvir, who ordered the IPS, the Israeli Prison Service, to treat them as badly as they can. And we see that in effect in the way they are being treated. So it's beyond just the security measures or the need to contain this many people. It also has to do with very negative sentiments in the Israeli public that are incited by the Israeli politicians.
Has there been any legislative change that affects the rights of detainees since the 7th of October?
Absolutely. Well, firstly, the state has been given permission to overcrowd the prisons, first in legislation, and then this was unfortunately upheld by the Supreme Court. So that's a first change that we've seen. The other very dramatic legislative change is the reintroduction of what is called the Unlawful Combatants Law. The Unlawful Combatants Law is an Israeli invention designated to arrange for the holding of people that are not prisoners of war in Israelis' eyes, but also not members of a protected population under humanitarian law. Those are combatants of another state, but not of a regular army. So if in the past this law applied to one or two people a year, for example, Hezbollah combatants captured from Lebanon and brought to Israel, nowadays this law is being applied to a number estimated between dozens and hundreds of people. And also the law has been amended in such a way that right now those people can be held without an arrest warrant for up to 45 days, without judicial review of this arrest warrant for up to 75 days, and up to 180 days without seeing a lawyer, without any connection to the outside world. Because they are not defined prisoners of war, they also have no access to ICRC visits, to family visits, completely disconnected from the outside world. And this is a major legislative change that we've seen since the start of the war.
And do you or your organization have access to these jails?
So to the regular prison service facilities, we do have access. Those are the same prisons that we used to visit before the war. The access is harder, it's more limited, it takes more time to arrange visits, but we still have some access. However, to all the detainees from Gaza that are held either in prison facilities or in military camps turned detention sites, nobody has access to them by law. And this is a very major challenge of our work right now, that we can't reach those people and we can document first-handedly the way they're being treated.
You speak about these camps, these military camps. Can you tell me more about these? How many people are held there? What conditions do they live in? Do you have any examples?
Reportedly, 27 people died in the military detention camps since the start of the war. According to statements by the military commander, 3 military camps, one in Israel near the Gaza border called Sde Teman, and 2 other military camps in the West Bank, Ofer and Anatot, have been redirected to become detention sites for detainees from Gaza, all of whom are defined unlawful combatants. According to reports that have come out in international media of the testimonies of people who have been detained in those camps, they are being held in open-air cages, blindfolded and handcuffed 24 hours a day, receive very poor and negligent medical care, very little food. You could see in the photos how skinny the people were, how malnourished they were when they exited those detention sites. Now, we don't know the exact numbers because the IDF does not release them, citing security reasons, but we estimate that at any given point there are between a few dozens and a few hundred Gazan detainees held in those military camps. And as I've said, those people have zero access to the outside world. The Red Cross Committee cannot visit them, neither can their lawyers. Their families are not being made aware of their holding. Multiple petitions to reveal the identity or the numbers have all been rejected by the Supreme Court. So this is a sort of a black hole that has been established in Israel to hold Gazan detainees and is extremely worrying.
And what are the profiles of these detainees who are held in these jails? What are they generally accused of?
It's a very broad range. Detainees from the West Bank are arrested according to military law that can criminalize anything between an actual terrorist activity, like preparing a bomb or a terrorist attack, and to being a member of an illegal student group that is supposed to be affiliated to one of the armed resistance groups. So anything in that range, including many cases of incitement. For example, in the same security prisons, we've also seen Israeli citizens, Palestinian Israeli citizens, who've been accused or suspected of incitement on social media, and they could only also land in those prisons for very projected prolonged periods of time. There was a case, for example, of Ahmed Khalif, a human rights lawyer from Al-Faham, an Israeli, who participated in a protest against the war, was suspected of chanting chants that supposedly incited violence and found himself almost 6 months in detention. He also underwent very severe abuse and was also one of the people who could give us testimony of what is happening in the prison.
And how do you proceed to collect these testimonies of torture? What are the obstacles you face?
So in normal years, PCATI would conduct anywhere between 50 and 60 prison visits of all sites where Palestinian detainees are being held. Since the start of the war, as I've said, it became much more difficult to arrange those visits. It can take weeks, sometimes months, until we get approval to go in and visit the detainees. Oftentimes lawyers would arrive in the prison and then be denied entrance just at the gate for numerous reasons. But we have been able to take out visitations together with also other NGOs that work in this field, our partners of Israeli organizations that also do detention monitoring. We've collected the data by all those organizations together, and this was the basis of our report to the Special Rapporteur on Torture and also to an appeal that we've made to the Israeli Attorney General, documenting 19 different cases of abuse that we've been able to identify, of human rights violations that range from physical beatings, sexual harassment and humiliation, other degradations. We also know for a fact, and this is based on data that has been published already by the Israeli Prison Service, that already 9 people have confirmed to have died in the Israeli prisons, including detainees that were arrested very recently and did not have prior medical conditions. And at least in some of those cases, evidence collected by Physicians for Human Rights suggests that their deaths were linked with direct violence and not for any other reason. I'm saying at least 9 people died. This is the number that we've been able to identify, name, age, and location. There are reports of many others, reports that go as high as 11 or 13 even. I'm talking just about the numbers that I can say for certain. In normal years, we would see between 1 or 2 incidents of death, usually of elderly prisoners with prior medical conditions.
What do these prisoners tell you about the treatment they receive in prisons?
Prisoners have been describing just random, very difficult beatings with clubs, with sticks, with their bare hands, being forced to kneel, being stamped upon, being strip searched, being beaten while strip searched, being forced to chant racist or derogatory terms or songs. There's been reports of music playing out loud all hours of the day. And as I've said, instances of sexual degradation also by women. We've heard accounts also from the women's prison of strip searches, of violence towards detainees, female detainees while being stripped. Very difficult accounts, really of all types of abuse, both physical and psychological. And I think the most touching and the most heartbreaking accounts that we are hearing are of people that we've represented before and that we have, let's say, a complaint already filed in their name years ago about torture that they underwent in Shabak, ISA interrogation. And when we go and visit them again now since the war and we ask, do they want us to proceed with this complaint? Shall we go to trial? They say, I don't care about that complaint anymore because what I've been experiencing in the prison since October 7, it's so much worse that it dwarfs the torture that I went through in the interrogation. And that is really heartbreaking because it shows you how cheap human lives and human dignity has become since the start of the war. So much so that people have given up on any access to justice, any accountability.
Did you share your concerns with the authorities?
So, absolutely, we have shared all our information and our concerns with the Israeli Attorney General and with the IPS Commissioner and urged them to open investigation into this issue, not only as separate incidents, but as a phenomenon and as a policy. The reactions that we got were very disappointing. I mean, the IPS blatantly denied an existence of any such phenomenon and only said that if there are any specific individual cases, then they would be investigated. But the issue is, this is closing their eyes to a bigger phenomenon, because what we've heard repeatedly by many, many people is that they are being constantly threatened and not to complain, and that prison guards are intimidating them and saying, don't you dare complaining, we have eyes in the court, another prisoner in your prison has died already and nobody asked any questions about them, you don't want to end up the same way. They're constantly being intimidated against filing complaints.
And do you feel that prisoners are reluctant to speak to you because of this?
So fortunately, many prisoners still trust us and still share with us the information and what they've been through. I think this is thanks to a lot of work that we've done in the prisons well beyond the war. As I've said, PCATI has been visiting jails for almost 30 years. But when we ask them, would you like to file a formal complaint? Would you like us to share your complaint with the authorities? Most of them are reluctant. They say, no, I can share the information with you. You can tell about it, but only anonymously. I am too scared to file a complaint because I'm afraid of retaliation and of reprisals by the prison guards. If they know I've complained, my life would be in danger.
What do you hope will happen with the information you collect and the complaints you file to the courts on behalf of Palestinian detainees?
So within Israel, our main challenge right now is the petition that we've filed against the unlawful combatants law. We've claimed this law to be unconstitutional, and we expect the Supreme Court to intervene and declare it so, and declare it null and void, and restore the procedural protections that those people were given before that. Internationally, we very much hope that the UN mechanisms with which we have shared this information will do their own investigations and publish their own findings about the abuse and torture that is happening in Israel right now, to sustain what we have said, and to approach Israel to ask for access, to visit the region, to collect evidence in their own merit, and to look into what we've reported.
And finally, to end on a positive note, what's your hope for the future?
First and foremost, the hope is that the war would end, that the massacre would end, that whichever human lives can still be saved would be. We hope for the Israeli hostages to return. We hope for the Palestinian detainees to be released. We hope for the military camps to be closed. That's the first step. The second step is, of course, for the restoration of the Gaza Strip, of being able to restore human lives there, and dignity. And perhaps on a broader, further to the future, we hope for accountability. We hope for justice. There are crimes that have been committed and are being committed in our name right now in the Israeli prisons and in other sites and in the Gaza Strip, and we hope that the people in charge would be held to account and would pay the price for the human rights violations that they are responsible for. Perhaps just to say to whoever is listening to this podcast, whoever is following the great work that OMCT does and that other anti-torture organizations are doing, to share this information, to speak up, to share the information that we are providing, the multiple media articles about the torture that's happening in Israeli prisons right now. We have to keep this item on the agenda, and I hope whoever is listening to this podcast and understands the challenges that we're facing would lend us a hand and help us out and continue to maintain this issue on the agenda, and to finally receive access to justice to all the victims of torture in the region.